Hey, dear listeners, I received an interesting email from an anonymous upper tier patron about parentification rage. So I thought I would answer that email. Let's get to it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's read this email. Anonymous middle tier patron wrote in. She says, any tips on dealing with the rage of healing from parentifications? I don't know why I pluralized it right there. Any tips on dealing with the rage of healing from parentification? I guess rage is a good sign because it's a selfish feeling, but it's also really difficult as a relative newbie. Just chiming in here. Yeah, anonymous middle tier patron, rage is a good sign because you say selfish, but it's taking care of yourself. You are paying attention to yourself. It is a need that you are noticing. So yes, that is a very good sign. And you're saying it's difficult because you're new to it. Yeah, that's expected. Going on with your email. During experience of rage, I've considered that obviously the rage is informative and a motivator. Just chiming in. Yeah, that's the way that I see it, is that it informs you about injustice and needs inside of you and issues that want to be expressed or something. And it is a motivator. Anger is all emotion is a motivator, but rage and anger in particular, because it motivates us to right the wrong. Going on with your email. So obviously the rage is informative and a motivator. It tells me that I do actually need to honor my own needs because there is real harm if I don't. But what do you do when rage is a call to action that you can't actually take? Obviously, expressing parentification-related rage can be dangerous because it feels unacceptable, and it can be futile. How do you deal with this call to action if the action you can take is really limited? Just chiming in here. Well, so I don't know exactly what you're experiencing, patron, but what I'll say, there's a lot that I could say. First off, I would say, I would talk to a therapist about this because this is extremely nuanced and long-term and very specific to you. There's no real formula to follow, and there's a wonderful opportunity to begin the process of healing through your anger. And it can be very confusing, and there can be fallout. And nothing really dire, but there's just a lot to process and a lot of pitfalls. Mainly, the main pitfall that you are exhibiting that I see universally, and I don't say that lightly, universally, people who were parentified or who were mistreated growing up and treated in a way such that they could not express their anger, which is almost always the case. Kids that are mistreated are almost never allowed to express their anger appropriately, at the very least. But when people enter therapy and or for whatever reason, they discover that, hey, I deserve to recognize that I was mistreated, there was an injustice, and now I'm feeling that anger. The anger was always there, but I'm actually feeling it now. Universally, people will have some version of what you're saying, which is that, but it's dangerous. So what do I do? Meaning that, and I don't know exactly what you're saying, patron, but what I hear a lot of clients say is, so, this anger that I have that you've helped me to identify with, and some clients might literally even blame me for pulling it out of them, which, I'll take, but it's not my fault that they have the anger. I'm actually creating a space where they're able to feel their feelings, and the anger's down there. It's not my fault that the anger's down there. But what they will say is that, well, they'll have this dichotomy or this black and white way of looking at it where they either suppress it completely the way they used to, or the anger will destroy everything. They will have a narrative around that, like the anger will, some people will say, once I feel the anger, I'll never not be angry. A similar thing will happen when people suppress their tears and their sadness and their grief, is that they will believe that to open the door to grieving and to be sad and to cry, they will say, well, if I cry, I'll never stop crying. And this notion, of course, is a defense. It's like a fail-safe. It's like your ego has those containers, those boxes that are in a hallway with a fire extinguisher, and it'll just say, like, in case of emergency, break glass. Well, you have one of those in your ego that, in case somehow your suppressed emotion finally starts knocking on the door, break this case. And when you do, you pull out, and it has this script that just says, convince yourself that if you open the door to this emotion, it will destroy everything. So it's acknowledging that the emotion is down there. It's acknowledging that you're, at least consciously, that you're healthy to express it, but you're still completely convinced that the emotion will destroy you, the same way that you did when you were young, because it was framed that way to you as you were being mistreated when you were young, and your ego framed it to you as well. And so it's not rational. Now, there are nuances of this, of course. If someone became rageful and decided to murder someone or something, then it is destructive. Or if someone became rageful and, decided to drive drunk. So, yeah, things can become destructive. But generally speaking, just the anger, when I ask clients, I'll say, like, well, what are you exactly worried will happen? And they often won't either have a story, and they just have a feeling that it will be dangerous, or they will tell me something that's ridiculous. Like with the sadness thing, I'll have clients that will say things like, well, if I start crying, then I'll never stop. And I say, well, what do you mean that literally? Or do you mean that figuratively? Like, what do you mean? And they'll say, like, well, yeah, literally, I'm pretty sure that if I start crying, I'll be crying 24/7. Maybe I'll stop crying when I sleep, but I'll wake up crying, and I'll go to work crying. I'll watch, comedy movies with Will Ferrell. I'll be crying, and I'll just be sad and upset and demoralized 24/7. And I will say, I can guarantee you that will not happen. There's not a lot I can guarantee about emotion and your future, but I can guarantee you that will not happen. It's just not ever happened. There's not a single case of humans where that's ever happened. I mean, the saddest person on the planet doesn't cry that often. So people will, like I said, either they'll just have an amorphous, like, well, it's just dangerous. I just know something bad will happen. I'll be like, well, like what? They're like, I don't know, just something bad. I'll be, well, like what? Well, I don't know, something bad. And so I get it, and I'm not frustrated with it. I might sound frustrated. It's more just I'm frustrated at the abusers for creating this problem in the first place. But, I take my time, and it can take literally years to move past this phase, if you will, of identifying the emotion is there, identifying that it's healthy to express it, but still, having doubts or being paranoid about what would happen if you actually did allow yourself to feel those feelings. So you're expressing that because you don't tell me anything, patron, that you're actually worried about. You say, but what do you do when the rage is a call to action that you can't actually take? Obviously, expressing parentification-related rage can be dangerous because it feels unacceptable. Well, that last little bit, it feels unacceptable. It's not unacceptable. It is more than acceptable. It is not only acceptable, but it is fair. And I've had this conversation with many clients as well, that there's in the hallway during an emergency, there are many boxes that says, in case of emergency, break this glass. There's the there's the catastrophization of the emotion, like, well, this will destroy everything, break the glass, pull that defense out. If that doesn't work, then it's this notion that somehow it's just unseemly or impolite or unacceptable. It's, bad human behavior. It's childish. It's selfish. There's all these labels that are put to it that are attempting to, from within, keep you suppressing your emotions. And a good way to look at it is all of these boxes of defenses in the hallway of emergency is an internalization from those that mistreated you, because they told you this. They said, because, for those of you who have suppressed your anger, when you were very young, you did not suppress your anger because you didn't know yet. You hadn't learned that yet. So whether it's when you were 4 or even 18 months old, you were expressing your anger for a time, whether you remember it or not, because it's impossible not to. And during those times, you were probably disciplined and punished and abused with a variety of messages, either implicitly or explicitly. A lot of parents will explicitly tell you that you're being childish, or that you're being a baby, or that you're being unreasonable or something. And, so not only are the defenses internalized literally, meaning that the abusive people will tell you these things or very much communicate, but also your experiences will tell you things as well. Like if you express your anger and then that causes you to be abused for 6 hours or something, or causes you to be ignored for the next 3 days, because parents will give silent treatments, they'll hold a grudge, then that experience will teach you something, will be telling you something, that your anger is dangerous, that your anger is life or death. And because being rejected and ignored by one's parents, or being abused for that matter, is a life or death, literally a life or death matter to young children. So your ego was correct in drawing that conclusion, but you're no longer in those shoes. So you just have this general feeling like it's a life or death matter, but it isn't typically. Again, it depends. There's no blanket statement regarding like all motivated behavior from rage is a good idea, but a lot of the motivated behavior from rage is. In our society, we pathologize anger and rage, particularly for women, but anger and rage are wonderful. I just today got angry about the fact that I wanted to see a movie, and there's not a single movie in the theaters that I want to see right now. I've already seen the movies that there's a time when in Seattle, with all the various movie theaters, the indie movie theaters and the big blockbuster movie theaters, at any given time, there was always a movie that I wanted to see, and I probably went to the movie theater twice a week, if not more. Late at night, I'd get done with work or something, and I would just walk out the door when I lived downtown and just walk to one of the many theaters that would be playing a late show at 9:30 or 10 p.m., and the movies weren't necessarily like the best in the world, but they were absolutely watchable, entertaining movies that were worth the time and the money and the effort. I'm looking at the movies in the movie theater. December is supposed to be when all the great movies are coming out, Oscar movies and stuff, and I'm just like, how come there's nothing? And I'm wondering, is it an old person thing? Is it because of Netflix? Is it because of the writer's strike? I'm guessing all these things are factors, but it's upsetting because you knew, if anyone knew me well enough, they would have said that I was a movie nut. I mean, who goes to movie theaters 2 or 3 times a week? When I was poor in my 20s, and I mean poor, meaning that there were times when I literally didn't have any money in my bank account and wondered how I was going to pay rent or something. And I was in one of those valleys of disposable cash, and yet I was like, nothing's going to stop me from going to a movie. And so I went into my car and rifled through all the cushions to find enough quarters, dimes, and nickels to pay for a $6 movie in Seattle back then. and I went to a movie, and it was well worth those coins from, under my seat. And so I'm a movie nut. And so for me to not be able to enact my movie nutness, if you will, is anger. If for many people, it'd just be like, who cares? But to me, it's a loss of a part of who I am. It's not the end of the world. It's not like being parentified by your parents, but because I wasn't parentified by my parents, I'm very in connection with my anger. And so I got angry. And so I started. So what did I do? Okay. So here's the thing. My anger, I didn't think of it as a dangerous thing. It went straight from experiencing the anger to expressing it. Right. And to be specific, right now, as I'm recording it, it's before my birthday, and Stacy asked me what I want to do for my birthday, and I hadn't really given it much thought, and I couldn't really come up with anything. So I thought, well, we could have a date night, and we could go to a nice dinner and then go to a movie like we used to do before the pandemic and back when movies were still okay. Because and it was kind of funny that I landed on that, because it's kind of a mundane evening, really, but it sounded so soothing to me. It sounded so, I don't know, comforting and fun. I was really looking forward to it. So I started looking at restaurants, and I started looking at movie theaters and movies. So, it's not just that movies suck. It was like I wanted to return to a particular kind of date night that Stacy and I would have. Some of our best moments or funnest moments have been like, there was this one moment when we saw one of the early MCU movies, and somehow I handed her the tub of popcorn, and she let go of it. We both thought the other person had it or something, and it spilled everywhere. I think it was I think we ended up deciding collaboratively that it was mostly my fault, but I think I thought it was 50% my fault, but she thought it was 90% my fault. So I figure it must be at least 70. So there was popcorn everywhere, and she starts laughing hysterically, and can't stop laughing in the middle of this theater, like crying, laughing. And during she does this every now and then. She'll just start crying. There was this time when we were watching Netflix, The Crown, and one of the episodes from the previous season was called Annus Horribilis. I think it's Latin for something like horrible year. But it's Annus Horribilis is essentially and it's adolescent to laugh at such a thing, but we did, and she just couldn't. Both of us couldn't stop. When one of us starts laughing, the other one can't stop. And this is one of those moments in the theater. And when these moments happen, her laughter goes on for so long, and then I continue laughing, and the laughter is so long that I'll have enough time to pull out my phone, unlock it, switch to camera, switch from photo to movie, and start filming. So I have a number of these videos of her cackling and crying, laughing, and she can't stop giggling and laughing to the point where she can't breathe. And I'm only capturing maybe the last third of it, because the first 2/3 of it happened where I'm laughing, and so you get my point. Is that that was a fun moment, and that's just one of the moments that is within this context of dinner and a movie that we would go to. And so for me to be excited for my birthday, and I'm looking at the movie theaters, and I'm trying to get excited, and I'm like, oh, okay, this movie, and oh, that one doesn't look so great, and not only not so great, but there's of the movies I haven't seen, I don't think I would want to sit through it. I mean, there's so many bad movies these days. Again, it's such an old person thing to say, and I know there are a lot of great movies, probably like indie movies that are on like streaming somewhere, but movie theaters, it's a whole experience. And I don't know. So I got angry, but I because I wasn't mistreated in this way as a kid, I instantly felt that anger. And what did that anger motivate me to do? Well, anger can motivate a variety of things, not just dangerous things, of course, but it can motivate a variety of things. Well, one way it's motivating me is ranting right now to you, which is actually, if you heard me get angry, it's one of the way. It's a wonderful way for me to get something off my chest and get support or be told that I'm stupid or something. I don't know. Another way I express my anger is to talk with other people. And since Umberto is a good friend and he understands movies, I texted him this super long text, like several pages of me just ranting. And I went back to the beginning. I said rant alert, and he'll have something to say. He hasn't texted me back yet. He's probably working or something. But I will also. Oh, the other thing I did was I decided to Google why do movies suck today, and so I read a bunch of articles about that. It felt good to have some validation for that. And who knows? Maybe every decade there's some group of people that think all movies suck today. So I don't know. But whether I'm right or I'm wrong, I felt rage and anger, and that was one. Another way was that I watched a bunch of YouTube videos that were reviewing movies today, and some of them were positive, some of them were neutral, some of them were negative, and it just felt good to hear their opinions about movies. Anyway, so that's my anger process. Now, of course, the level of anger of that is, 0.001% of the anger that you have, patron, regarding your parentification. But I'm telling you this because there's a lot of ways one can express anger. And when I talk with clients about their catastrophization of their anger response, they often will either, like I said, have nothing in their head as to, because that's the other thing, because throughout your life you were never allowed to express anger, you might not actually know the variety of ways to express one's anger. In fact, as I told y'all about my process of anger, you might actually think, well, that doesn't sound like anger and rage. That just sounds like processing your feelings or something, but and we can debate the label, but to me, it's very much anger related. It certainly is. I mean, there's some emotion motivating me, right? It's not sadness. It's not happiness. It's not jealousy. It's not disgust. It is anger. It's rage. It's and no joke. Rage is a good word for it. If there was some sort of movie producer that I could, scream at and say, will you people stop fucking with script writing and let people write good scripts? Will you people stop trying to just make money and instead make money and a good story? Will you people stop getting in the way of auteurs that know how to make good stuff? Stop ruining things with CGI and the, bubble gummification of art. Like, and it's always been that way. But anyway, it's anger, it's rage, because it's a big deal to me. It's not just this random activity. It's like I've been explaining to you. It's it goes back. In my family, there's some of my favorite family experiences were going to movie theaters. I remember seeing movies with my family when I was very young, like 5 years old. Christmas Eve, we had this tradition where we'd always go to see a movie. We still do. It's infused in our family ceremonies to see a movie. So you can express your anger in a variety of ways, patron. And especially in the interim, especially maybe you're building up. What I'm guessing, patron, is that you are worried that you're just going to scream and yell and insult your parents for parentifying you. And you're going to alienate them. You're going to burn a lot of bridges. And to be honest, that might be in your future. But if you don't want to do that, then don't express your anger that way. That's the key, is your anger isn't, you say, the question is, what do you do when rage is a call to action that you can't actually take? The fact that I don't know what call to action you're even referring to. I'm guessing it's something, like I said, where you're yelling and screaming. The fact that you say, my rage is calling me to take that action. Your rage isn't calling you to take that action. Your rage is telling you, will you fucking do something about this? Do something. You can't change the past. That's gone. So your rage can't correct for that. And you really can't even go to your parents and say, can you make it up to me somehow? There's nothing they could do to take away the damage. Like if someone were to crash into my car and I was angry, then they could make up for it by fixing it, right? But this is not like that. This is so the anger is often a motivator to right the wrong, but there really isn't any way for them to right the wrong. So anyway, the rage is just asking you to do something. It's not asking you to destroy. It's not asking you to yell. It's not even asking you to talk to your parents. It's just asking you to do something. In fact, there might be a lot of things that you're raging about, not only at those who parentified you, but you might even be raging at yourself for suppressing it. You don't deserve to yell at yourself, but you do deserve to have that feeling of, I feel not only mistreated by the outside world, but I've kind of been mistreating myself. The anger that you feel there isn't necessarily an anger of self-harm or flagellation, but an anger of, I deserve better. And whatever kind of mechanisms I have in place in my mind, fuck you. Because I do that to myself. When I have certain voices in my head telling me things, I get angry at that part of me, and I say, fuck you, shut up. Like, you don't run the show, you ridiculous voice, I do. So there's a lot of different angers, potentially. You can create. You can, I'll tell you other things that I do. I write music and lyrics, and I listen to music that, help me to feel and express emotions that I can't feel through language. There are songs that express emotional experiences that I have no idea how to put into words. These mix, songs that make me feel this mix of deep sadness and tremendous joy, and the disgusting aspect of human life alongside the triumphant, elevated nature of humanity. I'm feeling it all at the same time, weirdly. How do you describe that, really? I mean, I did just there, but it's not even near. I mean, it's close to the feeling, but not really. So, because I say that because when I listen to music that make me feel at least the feeling I'm thinking right now, it's not both sadness and joy. It's like this other thing, Anyway, well, let's take a break. There are other ways to express one's rage, like there's writing in a journal, there's going to therapy, there's yammering, there's starting a podcast that I do. In fact, one of the reasons why I'm here today is because when I first started the podcast, after a time, because no one was really paying attention, I mean, that wasn't the reason, but that was a factor. I went back to school to get my doctorate, and I didn't have time for the podcast, so I stopped making the podcast. And there wasn't a huge public outcry when I shut the thing down, so it wasn't a big deal. But I did love the podcast, and I shut it down, but I didn't have time, and so I didn't know if I'd ever start it up again. Well, what motivated me to dust off the microphone and make an episode after I don't know how long the break was. Maybe it was a year. Could have been longer. I don't know. But I decided to make an episode because I was angry about something. I had a lot of anger, and I didn't know where to direct it. There were factors in my life making it so that I couldn't really talk about it with other people, which sounds kind of stupid, because why would I make a podcast about it? But long story short, anger and me wanting to process my emotions because I was being prevented to do that in a way motivated me to do something with my anger, and I decided to start up the podcast again. And then that kind of got the ball rolling to make more episodes, and here I am today. And I don't know, maybe I never would have started the podcast up again. I mean, I think I probably would have, but not that early. Anyway, you can be an activist. You, patron, for example, could go online and find other people who are being parentified and help them or something. That I'm not telling you to do this, but that can be another expression of your anger, right? When I help people, and there's a variety of ways that I help people, and all those ways are at least partially motivated by anger. It's also motivated by compassion and altruism, but like I have a lot of anger about the way I was treated as a supervisee, by the way I was treated as a student. There were a lot of wonderful supervisors, not a lot. There were a minority of professors and supervisors that were wonderful, but there were two other groups of professors and supervisors. One group was just a mediocre group, and then there was another group of supervisors and professors that were abusive to me. And I don't use that word lightly at all. And they didn't just abuse me, they abused many other people as well. I didn't know it necessarily at the time, and that makes me angry, because of course it makes me angry. And what do I do with that anger? Well, partially I set out to supervise and to teach in a way that counteracted all those things that happened to me. Like, for example, and there are many examples that I could yammer about, but one example is that I, as a student, have always been fairly reserved. I don't raise my hand. I don't volunteer to speak in front of the class. I'm involved at the class, but I'm just not one of those people. I'm definitely at one end of the spectrum. And in a class, if a teacher would let me get away with it, I would probably never say anything publicly to the group. I'm involved, I'm engaged, I'm just thinking in my head, and I'm also feeling like, well, there's really nothing I have to say that's that interesting. That's usually what I'm saying, which might be shocking to some of you, but not to me. And when I became a professor, so there were times as a student where I felt like professors were arbitrarily forcing me to talk in class just because they had this, I don't know, religious dogmatic belief that if a student doesn't talk, then he's not learning, then they're not learning, which is so dumb. And so there were times when I would have professors that would actually keep track as to whether or not you spoke in a discussion or not. And I think this was during my bachelor's degree, but this definitely would happen sort of in my master's degree. But I think in my bachelor's degree, there was a professor that as soon as you said something in a discussion, he would actually go to his book and he would make a little check mark in next to your name, indicating that you said something. And if you didn't say something that class meeting, then you would be punished regarding your grade somehow. And I thought that was just so dumb, because what it did to me and the other quiet people in class was, one, we would have to compete with the loudmouths. No offense to loudmouths. As a professor, I enjoy extreme loudmouths I'm not a fan of, but the people who talk a lot, I, as a professor, fully enjoy. And they want to talk, so that's even a better thing. But one, I would have to compete with the loudmouths because now all of us are trying to compete to say something. We're all like, we're no longer focusing on teaching. We're focusing on how to game the system so we could possibly say something in class. And I just thought it was the dumbest thing. And so when I became because that bothered me and I would get angry about it, one of the ways I expressed my anger and got my anger out is that when I became a professor, I would tell all my students, day one, you do not have to talk in this class. If you are one of those quiet people, proceed as you would normally. If you don't say a single thing in discussions for the entire term, you will not be punished, because I hated it when professors did that to me. And not only will I not do that to you, but you be you. If you want to say something, I encourage you, but what is it to me that you say something or not say something? What you're here to do is learn. And if you learn by staying quiet, then you learn by staying quiet. Show me in your assignments that you learned something. So now, there are other things that I might get a little more upset about if a student wasn't participating, like if there was a group activity and a student was just, like where they talk amongst themselves, maybe like one-on-one, like, I tell everyone, pair up with each other and talk about this topic. And one person says, I don't talk and sit, but I never had a student do that. And I wasn't like that. So it's not like that. It's just in large group conversations. Anyway, so and I could probably rattle off another 100 things that pissed me off about being a student and a supervisee, that as a supervisor and as a professor, anger motivates me to not do those things. It's sort of like I'm getting back at those supervisors and those teachers, those professors, by giving my students a completely different experience, and it satisfies that anger. I can't go back to those professors and those supervisors and change what happened to me. And it wasn't, awful. Well, some of the behavior, some of the stuff I went through with professors, supervisors was awful. It was, traumatizing, where if I start to recall those experiences for me, my hands will start to sweat, my heart rate will start to go up, a physical PTSD type response. So, a very mild PTSD response, but 10 years ago, I would have probably a diagnosable PTSD response. Anyway, so anger can do a lot of things. It's not just scream, those professors and supervisors that mistreated me when I was younger, I have expressed my anger in a variety of ways. I published a book on supervision, which is, you could argue, also about being a professor. The first chapter is just about how I was mistreated by my first supervisor in my book on supervision. That was another expression of my anger. As I processed that, and putting that out to the world and getting validation from other people, it feels like I am absolutely, satisfying my urge to express my anger. And so there's a lot of ways in which one can, and people do, express one's anger. So my point, what I was getting to, was at no point did I go back to those supervisors and those professors and yell in their face. At no point did I call them out by name and say that they're a horrible person. I have expressed my anger towards those few individuals that mistreated me in this field by doing a lot of things. On this podcast, I will rant and rave about them, and I'll rant about the way in which I believe things should be, and that often is a reflection of the way I was treated. So there's so many ways one can express one's anger that no one would say were dangerous calls to action, patron. So I hope that makes sense to you. And then you also in your email say, I'm really interested to hear if you have developed some sort of step-by-step way that you work through this type of rage with clients. My answer to that is no. I don't have a step-by-step model. I guess it would be nice if humans were that simple, but there are so many roads to where you're at right now, and so many roads forward. Every client is different. Some clients actually do yell at their parents. I've had clients who connect with their anger, and I'm thinking of one client where he connected with his anger through therapy, and he said a similar thing, and we worked on that. And then he said to me that he didn't actually want to yell at his parents. He didn't think that would do any good. He didn't think it was fair necessarily, or he wasn't ready to think of it as being fair. And then he spent like a couple weeks on vacation with his parents, and on day one, he screamed at his parents, something like that. I don't remember exactly how it went, but he yelled and screamed at his parents, and then he came to me for the next session, and he told me that he screamed at his parents, and I actually was like, oh no, did I cause, should I have done more to help him regulate, or I don't know. But then he said that it actually was a good thing, even though in the moment he, as an adult son, was being unreasonable and unfair. It opened a door, it opened a topic, and that was the beginning of many years of work that he did with his parents. Things weren't perfect in the end, but they progressed, and he felt a lot better. The parents, weren't super supportive, but they didn't reject him, and there was some understanding from the parents that would grow over time. So I'm not saying that's what you're supposed to do, patron, is yell at your parents, but even raging and yelling at one's parents isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be, right? But it isn't necessarily. And this is why therapy and, working specifically with other clients, I'll do long-term family of origin work. There's a whole program that's been developed from, 60s, 70s, 80s called family of origin work, and I've done episodes on it. And it's a well-understood format. There's variations. Framo has one. Donald Williamson has one. Murray Bowen has one. But generally speaking, the gist of it is, and you can listen to my deep dive, is that I would work with clients is that they start to feel that anger, they start to feel the sadness, and they start to process the feelings. There's some emerging awareness. And what we do is in therapy mainly, we talk about it and review it and go over a lot of details. We start developing a timeline. We might make a genogram, a family tree, if you will, that has a lot of detail about relationships and boundaries and different moments in time and the configuration, the alliances, the hierarchy in the family, and really just looking at the family through a lot of different angles, and then understanding anger, discovery, expression, validation. This is all happening. And then the client at a certain point feels like they want to stretch their wings. They want to start talking with their family about this. And the approach is very controlled, very calm. And the client might have a lot of anger and rage, but the path forward can be such that the client can be angry and rageful in therapy or with supportive people, but when they go home, they hold it together such that they can actually interface with their family bit by bit, such that they can, like one model is that the client will ask the parents a lot of just curious questions about the parents' childhoods. And by, like patron for yourself, if it was your parents, I'm assuming your parents were the ones that parentified you. If you were able to ask your parents questions that you've always wanted to know, like what were your parents like? How did they treat you? And you were able to get honest answers from your parents, then depending on the situation, there can be a lot of healing there. It's weird how healing just that can be. it doesn't make any logical sense, but a lot of people have done this, before I was even a therapist. But as a therapist myself, I've had this process with a lot of clients and a lot of students, for that matter, because as family therapists, we run our students through this process, an abbreviated version. But because they're students, they're very gung-ho about it, and so they go very rapidly through these steps. But there's a lot of transformation, a lot of healing, even though you never actually yell at your parents. Your anger can be satisfied through a family of origin therapy process, over a couple of years. So, well, let's take a break real quick. Don't give up on your anger. Don't believe the defense in your mind that says it's all or nothing. It's black or white. Another way that some clients will deal with this anger is they will, what they call gray rock their parents. Gray rock meaning that they will become boring and not noticeable to their parents, meaning that they will just slowly and quietly back away from their parents. And that can be an expression of anger, right? Because for a lot of parentified adults, parentified kids who are now adults, they're often still enmeshed with their parents because their parents are continuing to depend on them in various ways. And so the adult client of mine, we might determine that for them, what they want to do, they don't want to confront their parents. They don't see any point in that. They don't want to do family of origin work. They don't want to investigate their parents' lives. They don't want to get closer to their parents at all. The best expression of their needs is to get their parents out of their life. But they know that if they just completely cut off their parents, that will cause a whole drama, and it might even create more fusion between the adult child and the parents. So the adult child, my client, will decide, I am going to very quietly and very unannoyingly, I'm going to very slowly pull away. And they will react, and there's always a reaction because there's a change in the system. And in therapy, we talk about, okay, what's the strategy? How do you, it's kind of lying to everybody in a way, but sometimes you have to resort to that because there's no reasonable way forward such that you, as a parentified child, now an adult, will be able to get your needs met and be treated fairly. If you could deal with them in a fair way and just go to them and say, hey, I want to change how things have gone. I would like an apology. I would like things to be different. And there was at least some way forward, then sure, go to your family. But if there's no evidence, and often there is no evidence, or at the very least you don't have enough lifetimes to go on a campaign to change these things, then sometimes it's best to just quietly pull away in gray rock. And the only way you can do that is by, I guess, you could frame it as you're being deceptive. You're not telling them the full truth. And it works. It can work. So that's another expression. And I say all this because I'm guessing a lot of the listeners have similar feelings. And I know a lot of you do. And in fact, I've interacted with some of you, and the feeling never ends. That parentified guilt is never really shed completely. I've worked with people where the clients have very successfully overcome a lot of the issues that I'm talking about, and yet after 5-10 years of therapy, there's still that voice in their head that says they're being selfish for feeling their anger or even just looking at their needs at all. There's always that little voice of, you're being immature, or you're being selfish, or you're being ridiculous, or you're being overly dramatic, or you're being mean to other people. That's another thing another voice. It's like how hurtful, because for parentified kids, they are made to feel so extremely bad for having their own needs, such that when the adult starts to express their needs, given their gauge that they acquired when they were young, it'll feel as though they're being very imposing on other people. I can't tell you how many times I would have this conversation with a client, and I'd be like, okay, so, your gauge from 0 to 100, with 0 meaning that you are completely self-sacrificial, and at 100 meaning that you are a psychopathic, narcissistic, selfish individual, and you're harming everyone around you who gets in your way regarding your needs. So the way I observe you today is you're at like a 10 in terms of you're still 90% self-sacrificial, but you're 10% now starting to assert your needs with other people. But you think of yourself as being a 90, meaning that you're very mean to everyone and you're stomping on everyone else's rights to assert yourself. But I guarantee you, based on, unless you're completely lying to me about what's happening in your personal life, you aren't even at 50% yet. So it feels like you're a 90 and you're being unfair to others and you're mean and selfish and immature. But you're not even at 50%, which is what you deserved. Everyone deserves to be around 50%, where they are assertive but not harmful to others most of the time. And so you're at 10%, but you feel like you're at 90. And so that's another thing that has to be overcome. And yet, after 5 or 10 years of therapy, there will always be an echo or a remnant of that notion in your head that you're being harmful to others by even just looking at your own needs and feelings, which is, the parentification curse. Well, that went on longer than I thought it would, but I got my anger out toward those internalized voices in your head, patron, and everyone else's by ranting about this for the past hour. This is something that I'm very passionate about and very angry about because of the injustice that I have been, very, very close to with my clients and other people in my life for that matter. It's an injustice that I see and feel all the time and makes me very angry. I'm rageful at the parents for mistreating you, or I'm rageful at the grandparents for mistreating your parents so that they would mistreat you or something. I'm rageful at a lot of people and things and systems, and I'm angry at the government and our culture for not emphasizing parenting skills or guidance enough. I'm rageful that this isn't talked about, that you would have to wait until you're 35 to randomly come across a podcast to talk about this before you could possibly know about this. I mean, why isn't this being talked about all the time? The things that I talk about on this podcast, there's a lot of various things I talk about. There's not a single person on this planet that I'm not talking about, including myself, regarding the various different ills of our society and the way people are treated and the defenses that we have. And so I'm not talking about some niche condition that only a small percentage of, I'm talking about the things I talk about when you pull them all together. I'm talking about things that are universal for humans across the planet and across time and space, I think. And yet, where is it being talked about in schools? Where is it being talked about on TV? And even physicians don't necessarily, the people who actually are, talking to patients. Some therapists don't even talk about half the things they should be talking about with their clients. So that's an injustice and it's bullshit and it makes me fucking angry. And so I have tremendous passion about this topic of parentification and many more, not because I'm just interested in it. It's because I'm fucking rageful. And that rage motivates me to do all the things to set up this microphone and to get the email together and to start the software and to edit this thing and to post it. Anger is a part of the whole thing. Anger is not just a dangerous yelling at one's parents. Anger is what gets me up in the morning. It's like there's a lot of fucking bullshit in the world that I have to fight, that we all have to fight. And so let's fucking fight it. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it, because you goddamn deserve it. You really, really do.